Okay, hello everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for joining us for this session on scaling AI in the enterprise. My name is Arpan Sheth. I'm going to introduce our speakers. We have a fantastic panel. Let me start with Mihir. Mihir Shukla is the founder and CEO of Automation Anywhere. Automation Anywhere is a RPA, an agentic process automation company. They have over 5,000 customers globally. He has over 400 million agents in production in their client base. In India, they work with hundreds of GCCs. 7 of the top 10 banks in India are clients of Automation Anywhere. I'm excited to have Mihir here with us to talk through this. We also have Karthik Reddy sitting right next to Mihir. Karthik is the founder and managing partner of Bloom. Bloom is one of the original VCs in India. The India venture ecosystem has grown up with Bloom in tandem. They manage 850 million of AUM today across a number of funds. Their companies include companies like Gray Orange Robotics, Purple, and a number of AI-first companies that we'll speak about today. And he was the chairman of the India Venture Capital Association from 2022 to 24. We also have Shravanth Faluru, closest to me. He's the founder and CEO of Avatar.ai. And he will speak about this perspective and philosophy around applied AI, not models. He is part of the India AI mission and fundamental part of building the equivalent of UPI for AI, not just for India, but for the world. They've raised $55 million from Sequoia and Tiger Global. Shravanth actually has 10 patents and a partnership with UC Berkeley, which is their knowledge partner building Avatar.ai. And then finally, we have Chinmaya Sharma. He's a venture capitalist with InfoEdge Ventures. He is their lead partner in AI in India, so he has a very broad and deep view of AI in India and what our founders are doing. Companies like Ghani, and if Ghani, I think, is at the AI Summit. So we're really fortunate to have a panel that is founders running companies in AI, VCs funding companies, so we have the front row perspective on the development of enterprise AI in India and globally. So we're going to start the panel, but I've been asked that we stand up and take a picture first. Very interesting.
Are you going to come with us?
So I asked them to make it a semicircle. We're going to try to make this a dialogue instead of me asking questions. I'm going to start by just putting up a few slides here, just like 2 or 3 to set the table, so to speak. Obviously, a lot has happened in AI, a little bit, right, over the last 18 months and a lot over the last month. And, as Bain & Company, we spend a lot of time working with our clients and enterprises globally, India, elsewhere, on applying AI. And we've sort of seen this snowball of, a little bit of tentativeness, putting your toe in the water. And now companies are really realizing that I have to figure this out. This clearly, I can be disrupted or disrupt. And I'm just going to set the table here and share like 3 slides quickly. Let's see, this works? Yes. There we go. Thank you, Shravanth. Right? This has changed. You'll see that 20% of companies are saying AI is our top priority. 53 are saying it's top 3. There's 1 or 2% I'd like to talk to them who say it's not a priority for them. And this has changed a lot. We do this survey on a global basis every 3 months. We'll publish results for the next one very soon. And I suspect we'll see something like 75% say this is a top 3 priority for me. The second piece, which I found interesting, this little bit more sort of US data, and we will have India data soon, is just the budgets. This is index numbers, so so you'll just see the average budget. The allocation is going up. It's not that companies are just absolutely spending this much more money, right? This money has to come from somewhere. You have to find efficiencies. You have to take it out of other budgets. But these numbers have been increasing quite dramatically. So now companies are like, well, if I'm spending this, where am I going to get ROI? So this this incredible priority in finding return on this investment is going up. How do I find the skills to go deliver this? And the last one, which is the one that I find interesting, is there are winners, right? This is just a snapshot of OpenAI, Anthropic, and Palantir revenues in the enterprise. And you'll see sort of just this scaling, right? People talk about scaling laws. And so at scale, these companies are growing rapidly. 18 to 20 billion this calendar year for OpenAI, similar numbers for Anthropic. You'll see the growth rates. Palantir, you'll see kind of similar type growth rates. You'll see the number of enterprises. So these technologies are rapidly penetrating the enterprise globally and in India. I think Dario said yesterday the most intensive use of Anthropic's models are in India, right? So India is right at the vanguard of this. So with that, I'm going to shift to the panel. And the first topic I want to start with is really around signal and noise. There's lots of noise around AI in the marketplace, but I would also assert there's lots of signal now. And even in India, we're beginning to see that. And so Mihir, I'm going to start with you just because you have a fairly large base of clients in India. I think when you spoke, you said there's something like, of those 420 million agents in production, tens of million are here in India with your clients. So how do you think about AI in the enterprise in India, and if you want, juxtapose with the US?
Hello. Yeah. So just to give you a preview of it, the overall adoption in India across various segments is high among other countries. So hundreds of customers, India enterprise customers, hundreds of GCCs, all these Indian SI partners, about 100 universities who are training, using our AI codes to train about 1 million students, and about 50 non-profit people like Akshay Patra and others using AI agents to scale their benefits. So a wide usage across Indian spectrum. The difference we see though in the enterprises is there is a clear marker among 10% of India enterprises that are breaking away from the pack and accelerating significantly.
And talk about those 10%. What's characteristics of those that are breaking away? What are they doing?
So those 10% think about the problem differently than other 90%. So there are two characteristics to it. The first is the enterprise AI is very different than how most of us think about it on a ChatGPT. I think of ChatGPT as your English teacher. And so it works great, and then when you try to put it in enterprise, you give an English teacher a math problem, a physics problem, and an engineering problem, and then you say it has hallucinations. Of course it has hallucinations. It's an English teacher. What we were able to do is take the benefit of the 420 million enterprise processes and create the enterprise worker out of it so that it knows how to function in an enterprise space. So you have to think about enterprise AI very differently because it has different problem than what most of us use for personal productivity. And second is you chase outcome, not promise.
Yeah.
That's the key.
Okay. I'd love to, Karthik, have you jump in on this, particularly this point about chasing outcomes, the breakaway, and what are you seeing in your portfolio?
Yeah, so I think it's the SaaS world, which is some folks are declaring dead in some sense, predominantly thrived on the fact that you sold customers on a per seat you sold the customers a per seat model or number of users who are actually using it. Whereas today, the enterprise CTO doesn't care about anything but outcomes. And fundamentally, ironically, they actually care about, as you said, the ROI, which sadly, the future is going to be this, that you're going to need lesser people, right, to do repetitive tasks. So the model shift is pretty rapid and moving in a direction where you have to rethink how to do outcome-based pricing, right, or compute-based pricing, which is connected to how it's saving you either a cost or it's generating revenue for you, right? And I think the first layer is essentially, you either have very sort of basic ChatGPT-like pricing, which is so affordable that you can't say no, but that typically doesn't work in enterprise, right? And so in enterprise, essentially, you're substituting a $100,000 resource or a $50,000 resource, but can you actually show that that sort of cost improvement before you're able to charge that outcome? So today, like you saw in your graphs, the spend is growing rapidly. But it's just there is going to be a moment of truth where people reflect and say, is it actually paid me back enough?
Yeah.
But where you're seeing that saving, we're seeing companies of ours fly. So even small companies, which are one company called Confido Healthcare in the US, it works on replacing a receptionist at a small clinic. So you'll say, what's so great about that? Finding those kind of resources and paying them $50,000 to $100,000 is non-trivial for most people, and the tasks are very repetitive, right? And so fundamentally, we've seen that company grow 10x in 1 year, right? And it's because it's directly pointing towards outcomes. It's not a typical SaaS, charge me $1,000 per seat kind of a thing, right? And so depending on call volumes, depending on actual work done, you're able to charge today. So it's almost like you're replacing a human worker with an agentic worker. And I think that's a fascinating shift that we've never seen before.
Me here and then Chinmaya.
If I can chime in. I think it's interesting that whenever we talk about AI, we look at the human labor equivalent, and that's understandable. But in our example of 5,000 plus customers, you have spend level in a different area. So you have a cash, which is your capital is your biggest cost. And if you use AI, we have customers who would found $200 million in free cash flow. So it's a huge advantage. Then if you're a materials company, you could reduce inventory by $400 million. That's a huge advantage. So labor is involved, but there are so many other areas. You mentioned seat-based licensing. We have a customer who spends nearly $500 million on a ticketing system. And with AI agents, we were able to automate about 84% of all ticket autonomously. And they were able to reduce the IT software spend by $250 million in that example. That's another cost area where money going to the IT, the software vendors, seat-based model is going away. So the money is coming out of many, many other areas, labor being one of them.
That's fantastic. Chinmay, you want to jump in?
I just wanted to make a point on pricing, whether outcome-based pricing, how it works, etc. Here's a few things that we definitely know. Time and expense-based pricing does not work any longer, which is perhaps a conversation that the Indian IT industry has been having for the better part of 2 decades now. Seat-based pricing does not work any longer, which is perhaps a conversation that the broader SaaS industry has been having for 2-3 years now. Those are the things that we do know. The things that we do not know is what is the ideal paradigm for pricing. I mean, we of course talk about usage-based pricing. Now, usage in the AI world that we live in is of course measured in different terms. So for example, I do not know how many customers are comfortable paying basis tokens. How many customers actually genuinely, intuitively understand what is the meaning of tokens? And I'm not even talking, a consumer where, Claude will tell you, you're out of tokens, you need to upgrade to the, next higher tier, or you need to wait for 4 hours before you can chat with me again, etc. I'm actually talking about sophisticated enterprises who are dipping into foundational work. Nobody really knows what is token. So token-based pricing, while it has become as popular as it has become today, I'm not personally sure that that is the end state the world will live with. Similarly, you take other manifestations of usage, whether, in the customer service context, it is number of tickets resolved, whether in the voice AI context, it is number of minutes that an AI has had conversations with a customer, or in the content creation world, it is the number of images you've created or the number of words of marketing content that you've created. All of these manifestations of usage, they are again extremely focused on quantity and not necessarily on quality. You had these many minutes of customers, you had these many minutes of conversation with the customer. What was the customer outcome? Can it really be measured, and so on? That is increasingly the conversation that we are now beginning to see enterprises have with our companies, our portfolio companies that are selling to them. So for example, just to illustrate this example, Gyani.ai, which is essentially a voice AI company, they would perhaps 2 years ago be able to charge a large India bank basis number of minutes that their AI agents are having conversations with customers for. But now increasingly, the pricing model is moving to how much debt did you help me recollect? And if you help me recollect X, can I give you some bips of that X? What is the number of loans that you actually helped originate? And how many of those actually closed with a human in the loop? If these many closed, irrespective of how many you originated, can I give you a bips of that? And therefore, the very limited point that I'm trying to make is that pricing continues to be a little bit of an art, not so much a science. Of course, folks like yourself, Arpan, from Bain, you of course understand that pricing is not necessarily a mathematical equation ever.
Well, let me jump on that, and then Shrem, I'm going to come to you because this pricing conversation is linked to ROI, right? Your clients, your buyers, enterprise buyers, are saying, look, AI is still a de novo technology, right? It's still a horizon technology. I'm a little uncertain. I'm spending a lot. That chart shows that there are a lot of money. So how do I measure ROI? And I don't want to pay fixed prices for it. I don't want to pay B&Q, right? Diamond materials for it. I see some of our IT services friends in the audience. I spoke to one CEO yesterday who said, look, what I'm doing is saying with AI, I can do something in 2 months with 6 people, which before I could have done with 50 people over 9 months, and I'm trying to split the difference with my clients. Somewhat value-based, but it's, he's like, I'm just trying to find my way. Srevanth, I know you've had these dialogues with your clients, some of the services, quite a bit, which is, I can do X. How do you price for it? And that's intrinsically linked to how you think about and how they think about ROI. Can you maybe just comment about your experiences here?
Yeah, I think to start with, it's tough to follow because you guys have said everything that I agree with. But maybe coming back to your question, the real fundamental switch that I see happening, both in terms of boards wanting it and AI native startups now fitting in, is a shift from usage-based, like Chinmay was saying, towards outcome-driven models, right? Pricing models. And to Arpan's point, ROI becomes that bridging the gap from a usage-based thinking, which is images or tokens or whatever kind of usage metric you want to look at, to P&L reflecting ROI metric. Our pricing model at Avatar is now literally a risk-sharing model beyond a fixed platform subscription, where we create the value and then participate in the value that we create. And to your point, we are seeing hundreds of millions of dollars of P&L cost savings, even in a 500 million cost-based company. So you're talking in the near term, in probably 18 months, being able to save 200-ish million of the 500 million cost base that someone's operating with. And that's huge. And that's probably the reason why AI native startups will also start fitting in, because for a board to decide a 200 million fixed investment, Arpan, to your point, is very, very difficult. I mean, that's without any guarantee. That kind of a fixed investment is not pragmatic. So I think the way it'll evolve is the boards would want a limited fixed component, a measurable way to measure ROI, which reflects in the P&L, shows up in the storytelling that maybe the leadership is doing with their investors, and then allow the partners to participate in the value, economic realized value, in lack of better words.
Can you also, maybe you, Srevanth, Mihir, speak about this notion that as you speak to your clients on AI and agentic, what they're saying is, I don't want a 5% improvement from you. I heard this yesterday as well from a client of mine who said, I want order of magnitude. Do you hear that now? Is that, or am I off here?
I think that is what makes successful deployment different than the not successful.
Yeah.
We use the term called autonomous enterprise, where up to 80% of work is either autonomous or AI assisted.
Yeah.
And so we would start the conversation with that and say, are you thinking about in that range, not 5%? Because that's the potential.
Yeah.
I would totally agree with them. And I actually think, Arpan, there's maybe a more fundamental aspect here, which is most of the companies have tried pilots.
Yes.
The pilots have led them to a purgatory zone. So they haven't really seen ROI, to your previous question, and this one, just bridging those two together. I think there's a lot of skepticism in terms of an ability to shift from pilot purgatory to a production scale system. And it probably comes to the execution. I keep saying to my clients, the hardest part of AI is not intelligence, like LinkedIn and Twitter indicate. It's probably execution. And what you see is if you do a sandbox accuracy attempt, you're probably use a general purpose LLM and still be able to show 70, 80% accuracy, which looks great.
Yeah.
But
Can-
doesn't
can I
really
just-
translate. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just meant to interrupt Arpan. The point that I wanted to make is that I actually would like to discourage decision makers from thinking about ROI too much, whether it is in incremental 5 to 10% terms or in revolutionary multiple X savings and so on. That's exactly the kind of thinking that turns AI into a bit of a cost-cutting exercise, as opposed to an investment that should ideally compound over years. So much so that instead of asking the question, hey, will I be able to save 5% of my costs, let's call it, I don't know, manpower cost in customer service and so on. The question to ask is, can I actually allocate 200 bips, 300 bips of my current EBITDA and actually put that to AI, as opposed to asking AI to save me some money? Because the right way to think about AI is not something that will make me more efficient today. The right way to perhaps think about AI is it's an existential question. Can you really afford to not become AI first if the evidence that it will give you 5% savings this year was shaky? Can you really afford to?
I think it's great. I want to ask you guys a question, because one of the things we see, I experience in my clients, is that scaling enterprise transformation is, and perhaps some people think of it as a technology problem, AI, that there is an underweightage on thinking through the human elements of a change process. If you're taking out 200 to 500 million, Mihir, you talked about, actually that impacts a lot of people. That means the way work gets done is fundamentally different. Perhaps in Garthik, a services firm, that means you need to price differently, not the provider, but meaning your customer, right? I have a 40, 50%. How does that enter into your dialogues as you're speaking to a CEO, a COO, whoever it happens to be in a C-suite, that actually you need to think more broadly than about the impact to your legacy data and data integration, but the human elements of change?
That's the elephant in the room, isn't it?
Yeah.
Look, I've been personally part of hundreds of these actual conversations. Yeah. And you can talk about the macro impact where the best data we have says that there will be more jobs created than that would be lost. But that macro doesn't work in a specific conversation.
Yeah.
So what happens in a specific conversation is a very compassionate conversation about team coming together and deciding what future looks like. Can I share one or two to kind of ground the conversation? Because if we stay at this level,
Great.
It only makes it into the Twitter feeds or X feeds. Take an example of one UK large hospital. They through AI, they automated a process, and that ended up saving 4,000 lives. Right? Now, it resulted in certain job changes as a result of it. And this was a community hospital. Now, you should be outraged that there is an administrative process that cost 4,000 lives. And so the community said, no, we want to change this. Forget about jobs. Yeah. So in that conversation, there was no debate. There is another conversation in Europe that I was part of, where it was a unionized labor. There was a team of 50 people, and the AI process removed virtually all errors. And there was a 50 people team just solving errors. So the union participated. And we say, but you cannot create jobs by creating errors. Errors go away, jobs go away. So each of these conversations are a very open dialogue, very compassionate dialogue about what makes sense. And they have to happen. Hundreds of this have to happen in every scenario.
So Shravant, and then maybe Garthik, Chima, I love you, because part of what I constantly hear is part of the role of what AI is attacking is the human putty that sits between systems of records and systems of actions and sideload, and to your point. So this must come up in your dialogues.
It certainly does. But Karthik, do you want to?
No, I think for us as investors, not as much of insight into that. The way we see it, Arpan, is that there's a slightly different insight I want to give, right? In India, if you see a lot of the companies that have done extremely well, in migrating from trying to be a software-only player, like a SaaS player,
Yeah.
into what we used to call internally a SaaStra player, meaning you don't sit and sell software, you take control of the transaction layer and improve the outcome, was happening even before the AI world.
Yeah.
So if you look at all the B2B behemoths that have been built in India, trying to be like Zetwork and all of these guys, they become full stack providers. So now when we look at Indian founders thinking, at least in the context of the Indian enterprise, we don't see it as, are you replacing cost or ROI alone? We actually apply that same principle to an AI first world, where you're saying the provider is not going there and selling tech, but actually selling the full outcome and actually owning the full outcome. It gives an opportunity for you to get a piece of, the example that Chinmay gave, that you can charge certain basis points. So we have a similar company, Chinmay, but it didn't start as an AI foundational model. It started as a loan recovery agency business, right? And 2 years ago when we funded the company, we thought we'll have to scale from 500 human agents to 1,500 human agents. Now we have down to 250 and the AI agents have taken over. And there you don't actually simply go and say, I'll build a technology solution, but you actually improve loan recovery rates by giving better outcomes to the banks. And I see this future of this company as someone who actually owns loan books.
Okay.
Yeah, not simply just gives a technology layer, right? And to the point that Meher was raising, you have to fundamentally say, are you doing the right thing for a person who's struggling to pay back and dealing with that particular customer with empathy and making the credit system in this country more robust? Or are you worried about like losing five relatively dumb jobs of a loan agent calling and screaming at 10 people? That was the job, right? Like how's that a great job, right? So I think the power of AI is that it eliminates, in my humble opinion, more dumb jobs than we were worried about. And a lot of humans should not be doing those dumb jobs. Like if you look at weeding, for example, which one of our agri-robotics companies does. Weeding. Human weeding. So if you have a crop in India, like cotton, human labor migrates farm to farm to actually weed, right? A computer vision enabled robot can actually spray weed that much better than any human can. No, so is that a form of employment that you want to encourage, or do you want AI to take that over? And the US is buying that product faster than India.
Okay.
Arpan, I know being in India, we think of labor as our core competency. And so again, I'm rephrasing the question. We always come back to labor. But let me take an example. We have a large Indian company here that is a very capital-intensive business. Using AI agents, they are looking at saving 20,000 crores in their cash. You know how many labor it would take to save that? Forget labor.
Yeah.
I tell them, in a capital-intensive business, or I go to Europe where unions are there, and it's a manufacturing company. I said, I don't want to talk about labor. I want to save in material, I want to save in cash, because your 90% savings will come out of that.
Yeah.
And I insist so many times, why are you going? I mean, there is this knowledge industry where labor is the primary cost. But for so many industry, labor is not your primary cost.
Yeah.
Why bother?
Whatever, Shravanth, you go ahead, and Chinmay.
Sorry to break you there, Chinmay. But I think, we could debate for the next 2 hours on this, and we will see differing opinions. And I'll tell you why. One size will not fit all. And if you just take a step back, AI's real power is non-linearity, right? It's decoupling demand and supply. It could either translate into cost savings in the near term. It could, as Chinmay was saying, actually drive revenue growth in reimagining the business model from the deterministic state that we've all architected our business yesterday to the AI native non-linear way of architecting businesses. And that's why I actually, in my experience, Arpan, to your point, this is the biggest negotiation topic with most companies. What I see is the different cohorts. If a company has demand much greater than supply, it'll likely drive towards revenue growth. If a company is probably struggling with unit economics or margin profile and doesn't have that kind of a demand growth, it is going to translate into cost savings because it's constraints that they're living with. And the same rule will not fit those kind of archetypes. And maybe that's just the point that I wanted to put forward.
Chinmay, and then after you, I'm going to sort of just slightly tack a different direction.
Sure, I'll take a quick minute. I'll just thank Karthik for outraging the sensibilities of the urban Indian by telling us that weeding is done by migratory manual labor. But more to the point, I just want to make a fundamental comment that, because of AI, there will be winners and there will be losers. So there's all manners of conversations happening with decision makers. For some decision makers, the conversation that you need to make this multi-million-dollar investment in AI right now so that you're able to reap benefits sometime into the future are easy conversations. Others, on the other hand, are more lured by the more attractive conversations of, how many product managers or how many, designers can I get rid of by putting this model in one silo of my ops, right? Those are not necessarily the right kind of conversations to have. And therefore, there will be companies that are NGMI, simply not going to make it, right? And the real conversation to have in the AI context is not so much, what model can I put in to do my customer service and so on. The real conversation to have is how are my data pipelines working? How do I build a unified data architecture? How do I bring together, the 45 legacy systems that I have put together over the course of last 2 decades? How does that tech debt get paid off for me to become AI ready? But that's the boring, painstaking, expensive conversation with no real ROI in the next 9 months.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Let me sort of tack the dialogue a little bit, a different direction. What's come through this dialogue, and lots of dialogues, I'm sure, over the next few days, and I know it's in the ether, is what is India's role in enterprise AI transformation, both in India and for the globe, right? For the last 20 years, India's played an incredible role, both through our services industries and our software industry, of helping transform companies globally from a technology perspective, obviously with a labor-heavy model. As you think about the next wave with AI, what is our role? Is it applied technologies? Perhaps it's not frontier models. We will have semiconductors in India, but perhaps not for the next few years will we be providers of GPUs and TPUs. So what is the role of India? How should we think about the role of India in applied AI for enterprise transformations? And maybe, well, Mihir, I'm going to actually have you go last, but I know you have a strong opinion on this, but maybe Sravanth, Karthik, and I've just, opposing views are okay.
Very important point, and I think it's existential almost for India to figure an answer to this. My view is, let me take an analogy, right? If you look at ISRO in space tech, and if you contrast that with, say, a US or a China, we're probably not really competing on landing on Mars first, but if it's about putting a satellite in the orbit to power our mobile communications, we're probably the cheapest by a factor of 50x. So I think there are 2 dimensions of AI. US and China are primarily focused on accuracy and AGI, the artificial superintelligence or general intelligence as it's referred to. But there is also a here and now impact unlock, which is probably what you're referring to as applied AI, which I think would be more on the efficiency curve. If you think about a large volume enterprise workflow, the inference costs using a 1.8 trillion parameter model would be prohibitive. So there is a need for efficiency, not just accuracy. And there are techniques today like distillation, which DeepSeek kind of introduced to the world, which India is very apt at. India AI mission is doing a lot of that. And I think there's a play there where you don't really need to compete with US and China, but instead piggyback on that base foundational layer and translate that into real usable intelligence, either for enterprises or for citizens or for even governance initiatives, which is how we're framing it as part of the India AI mission. But Karthik, why don't you go?
I think our advantage has been quality of people and just raw horsepower in terms of talent. I think there's a massive repurposing of that's required. I feel like the guys who were doing IT services where the jobs were more, as you said, human coding, human QA, human integration, all of that can be rapidly adapted. I think the world as a whole, you see all these hot headlines about AI native companies moving very, very fast. Your survey that themselves said, only 20% think of this as the number one priority. Yeah. And that's because I think most companies internally are not as adept to being able to do everything themselves. So the IT services industry becoming an AI transformation services industry is like on the cards. Otherwise, I think the big 6 or 10 in India will lose their advantage very rapidly. That's one small segment. As when it comes to the venture guys, like the folks you have on the panel here, I think our opportunity is pretty much like a reset of what we saw 10, 15 years ago in SaaS. So we don't have to necessarily be only the AWS or the Google cloud of India. While that opportunity is, the government is trying to set a level playing field on infra as quickly as possible, I think the ability to go and build for an Indian use case, I think we will always lie with the Indians. Because from a cost structure and an outcome perspective, I think it's very difficult for an American company to come here and establish their presence and beat an Indian company. Our ability to go win the world it's like there was always skepticism around that, Arpan, that how many $10 billion+ companies have we built out of India in the product space, right? But I actually think this is a added impetus in that direction. Because the level playing field is again at zero at this juncture. So we can move faster, we can move our talent faster, but if you look at the size of the talent pool in India on IT services, almost all of that has to pretty much overnight magic wand transform itself into becoming AI native. And I think that is the future that we can win if we can move our talent to that. And we've shamelessly batted on a company that actually upskills people on AI talent. So, because we think that is the next step for India.
That's fantastic. I'm going to come to you next. And just for context, part of InfoEdge's Ventures mission is to find Indian entrepreneurs, right? To find Indian entrepreneurs that are building disruptively both for India and the globe. So in this question around what is our role in AI, whether it's applied AI, if you agree with that, or something else, how do you think about it? What are you looking for? What are you finding?
Sure. I personally think of applied AI as a bit of a reductive framing. I do not think any country or any company or any ecosystem will necessarily have the right to scale applied AI beyond a certain point unless everything else that is needed to do AI in the ecosystem is also owned somewhat locally. So, AI accelerators, high bandwidth memory, power, data centers, foundation models, and so on, all of it will also need to be done in some measure, some capacity in India by Indian entrepreneurs as well. So I'm not necessarily suggesting that some Indian founder is going to build a foundational model that is going to take on OpenAI or Anthropic in the next 1 year. All I'm suggesting is that we need to have our own foundational models, whether you build it using techniques like distillation or whatever have you, to be able to tackle Indian challenges, number one, so, Indic languages, Indian voice accents, and so on, but also to be able to service some of the more global problems that, the Indian IT, BPO, KPO industry has been servicing over the course of last few decades. On top of that, I completely echo Karthik's thoughts that historically our advantage has been a deep talent pool, service-oriented DNA, and an ability to perhaps deliver solutions cheaper. But we also now have perhaps the most advanced DPI. And the DPI that we have, whether in terms of having data of 1.3 billion people, having data around, I don't know, maybe more than 10, 12 billion UPI transactions every month, having some understanding of how commerce is being done through ONDC, these are uniquely Indian advantages that are going to help us build foundational advances in India that subsequently will help us earn the right to do applied AI.
Fantastic. Mihir, I know you have a very deeply held point of view on this topic, so.
I think this is a global experiment, so we have an amazing opportunity to learn from everywhere this is being run. So you can see the frontier models in US, you can see regulations in Europe. I think to your point, India's strength has to be in the applied AI. In my view, there is no point in chasing frontier models. I think today, everything we wanted to do it, if there was no more investment in frontier models, we can do 80% of everything we want to do. And with one GPU, we can do 95% of everything we want to do. I think it's about infusing AI into every sector of economy. That's where the return is. And if you look at the example of China, that's a good example because it's a good balance between technology progression, but the infusion of AI. Because, so take example of the different industrial hubs that India has, whether it's Mumbai, Pune, or Chennai, or various hubs for various industries. There is a way to focus AI and infuse in those sectors to create a competitiveness that is, you can compete at the world level. And that is where the power lies. I think if it was up to me, I would reframe the conversation. This is not about, this is an opportunity where how can India outflank everybody else? And so the way we could switch, we could skip a landline revolution and went straight to mobile. The Western civilization has trillions of dollars of investment done. So they are slow to move. And India hasn't done some of those old investment, which is you can completely bypass it into a new AI-driven model and outflank other economies. So I think it is a technology moment, but most importantly, it's a leadership moment.
Yeah.
And every time I meet an Indian leader and they say, look, we want to do this, we want to catch up, I said, you don't want to catch up, you want to outflank.
Yeah. So let me, and then Karthik, you should jump in. I want to build on this point because let's go back to enterprise AI transformation in India. There's two sides to this coin, which is what can India do as providers of services, talent, software, AI. But there's the other side, which is as a CEO, as a promoter, what should I be doing to push further on the adoption of these technologies? Because, you know, that chart I showed that, you know, Karthik, you referred to, that's 20% said it's my number one priority, 50% top three. I would conjecture if I showed the India-only data, those numbers would be quite different. It would be 10% would say it's a top priority, 25 would say it's top three. So, and I think that's a little bit your point, Mihir, which is you have to have both sides to this. I'd like to get, what do you say to the CEOs, promoters in this audience?
I'm not in a position to, advocate to them, but we're seeing the best of those examples come through. Okay. So like the earnings call, which did a lot of buzz last week, was Bajaj Finance talking about how the call agents volume has gone through the roof and their ability to service their customer has just, just dramatically shifted in just 2-3 quarters, right?
Yeah.
And so I think people have to take cues from this and not worry about, oh, should I radically transform everything overnight? You can take pieces of your businesses that are core and actually move dramatically. So we are benefiting, right? So we have companies, I'm sure, in all our portfolios, or like in our case, Squad, Exotel, etc., which are actually powering some of this, automation, for example. So my point is slightly different, Arpan. I think for the first time, India doesn't have to focus. There's a US-centric world, which was where we used to drive most of our attention to, because India wasn't adopting fast enough. And then there's China, which has incredible, technology capability, but is not trusted by a lot of the world. And so I think for the first time, the playing field, when it gets leveled like this, the fact that you don't have to put humans in every other market and AI can actually do the bulk of the work opens up the rest of the world as a marketplace for you, which was never there historically. So why aren't you servicing Europe, Africa, Southeast Asia, Middle East far more dramatically? Because they do not have talent pools or their native models or application areas. It should all be available to us. Of course, it is more challenging. It's like adding 50 more states to the Indian, Indian market and saying, can we go and actually win in 80 different markets? But I think that's an opportunity waiting for us to happen. And you can build multi-billion-dollar companies. And within the Indian context, I feel like, the Indian enterprise, which was broadly, as pointed out multiple times today by Mihir as well, rather than focus on, how can we be process and cost competitive using labor, which is the wrong way to think about the problem, how do we repurpose ourselves in building kind of agentic first enterprises, which nobody ever thought was possible in India. Because you kept throwing labor at the problem, but that's not the way to think about how to solve better for an Indian audience. So eventually, I think the net total of that is there is a UPI-like moment waiting to happen in India, or a UID-like moment waiting to happen in India, on a a AI application layer, which suddenly catapults India to a very different, opportunity set than playing piggyback on what the US is developing for us.
I love that. So let me piggyback on what you just said. We have somebody here on the stage who's actually helping to build the UPI of AI for India. What would you say to what Karthik said? And also just comment a little bit on my assertion that, like, what would you say to the CEOs and promoters to get moving here?
I think there's a 2-minute time check that we're getting.
Okay.
So I'll keep my answer short. But yes, we have been given a grant by India AI Mission to build something called Unified AI Interface, UAI. It's trying to emulate what UPI did for payments, but doing it for AI. It'll be a digital public infrastructure, eventually trying to accelerate what Karthik was speaking about and Mihir was speaking about, right? I think that's honestly the real opportunity and probably an existential problem statement to tackle as we stand today. The only thing that I would add is we keep talking about labor and population as a negative. In the AI world, if we really want to get to AGI, reinforcement learning through human feedback is going to be the path to get there. And I think there is an opportunity to flip the hourglass of looking at population as a liability in the world that we're perhaps watching and convert that into an advantage. And if we do that at a population scale, I think that's what's going to lead the leadership, even at a foundational model, Mayor. So a little bit of a contrarian viewpoint on population being a liability versus perhaps being spinned and utilized as an advantage. I think we are probably over time, so.
Fantastic. Look, this was incredibly helpful. I know we're a minute or two over time, but I do believe that some of the things you can take away from this panel is that the moment is now, right? If you were talking to a CEO or if you're talking to a promoter in the room, if you're not adopting AI, get on it right away. The result stories are real. You've heard it from these guys. The role for India is large, both locally and for the globe. So thank you for the time. This was wonderful. Jamea, Mihir, Karthik, Shravan, thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, Arpan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to our esteemed panelists. We will now be giving away mementos. Can you just pose for one photo, please, with the mementos? One photo with the mementos. Thank you. Many thanks to Bain for organizing this fantastic session, and thank you to our audience for joining us. Please stay back for the next session with Bharat Jain. We request our audience to please exit through this gate, and the audience for Bharat Jain may please enter through the gate on my left. Thank you so much.